Good morning, everyone, and welcome. Today's Procurement Professionals Group topic is MBE Supplier Development Initiatives. Before we get started, I would like to take a moment to go over a few housekeeping items. My name is Marco, and I will be the webinar organizer for today. We want to make sure that today's presentation is extremely valuable for you, so we ask that you submit all questions by clicking on the question button in the control panel and typing your question in. Our speakers today are Camille Bragg and Arlene Anderson. Camille Bragg joined Keybank in 2014 and is Vice President of the Supplier Diversity Manager. Camille has more than a decade of experience working in supplier diversity and economic inclusion. She works with internal and external stakeholders to foster inclusion in key supply chain and drive engagement with diverse-owned businesses. Arlene Anderson is the Senior Manager of Diversity Solutions for the Metro Health System. She is responsible for developing and implementing a best-class supplier diversity program to support Metro Health's mission to the community. Ms. Anderson has more than 20 years of experience in diversity, inclusion, and equity work. Welcome, ladies. And I guess we'll start initially by letting you both have a little bit of time to do a brief introduction, go with some PowerPoint slides, and then we'll get into the questionnaire section. So Camille, please take it away and start us off.
Thank you, Marco. A pleasure to be here. Good morning, everyone. As Marco had mentioned, I am Vice President, Supplier Diversity Manager at Keybank, and I've been at Key since 2014. You can move to the next slide, Allison. So just wanted to very quickly provide an overview of Keybank, very high level. Keybank, we're in 15 states from Alaska to Maine, 3.5 million clients and over 17,000 employees. And we're headquartered, of course, here in Cleveland. In terms of our commitment to supplier diversity, Key has a very long-standing commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And within our DE&I initiative, we have three pillars: workforce, workplace, and marketplace. And supplier diversity falls within marketplace and really is an essential component to our overall DE&I strategy. We know that inclusion makes great business sense. And we realize also that if we have a greater access to diverse suppliers, we are going to have, of course, access to more a diverse supply chain, access to innovative products and services. And at the end of the day, our supplier base really should reflect the communities that we serve. Next slide. So just to share a bit about our strategy, it has been in place over 20 years, and I would actually say it's really about 30 years. It goes back into the late 80s. And our focus within supplier diversity at Key is on companies that are owned, managed, and controlled, at least 51%, by minorities, women, veterans, service-disabled veterans, LGBT, and individuals with a disability. We continue to evolve our strategy over the years. Our emphasis is on Tier 1 and Tier 2 opportunities. Of course, Tier 1 is the majority of our diverse spend, but we are very engaged with our non-diverse Tier 1 suppliers in terms of asking them to support our efforts around DE&I and report to us on a quarterly basis with Tier 2 and their spend with diverse suppliers. Within Key, we have an organizational goal around supplier diversity, and our lines of business have goals. Each of our lines of business also have supplier diversity champions that really work within their line of business to drive supplier diversity outcomes. So they are very central to our strategy. And within our organization, as I'm sure within many of yours, supplier diversity is about collaboration. I mean, it's supplier diversity, procurement, and our lines of business to really drive our outcomes. Next slide, please. Okay, so supplier development. So I wanted to share a bit here. This is a proposed initiative. So as I had mentioned, we have been focused on supplier diversity for many years with our tier 1 and tier 2 strategy. And so supplier development is really the next piece that we want to put in place this year. And we realized that we want to have a framework that encourages or really drives opportunities for diverse suppliers. And so what I'm sharing here is the proposed framework. So this is in flight, excuse me. But our strategy would focus on not only our current diverse suppliers, but also our prospective diverse suppliers. And what I am envisioning and what our plan is to have a supplier development strategy that is over the course of a year, but that encompasses at least 4 to 6 sessions. And so we may have a track for our largest diverse suppliers, and then a separate track for our other diverse suppliers and prospective suppliers. And we feel that this is really a great opportunity from a prospective diverse supplier perspective, a diverse supplier perspective, excuse me, to really identify suppliers that are not currently working with us, but that have the capabilities, that have the service or products that we feel would be critical or crucial partner to Key. And so incorporating them into our development framework, I think would be ideal. And so in this multi-day framework that we have, we would really provide a corporate overview. We would include various stakeholders, so corporate procurement, third-party risk management, and then we want to have subject matter experts that come in and speak to, excuse me, our suppliers around topics such as succession planning, business financials, operational excellence. And then we want to have a mentoring component and the inclusion of a piece where suppliers can do presentations and do a matchmaker. And so we want to make sure that we are making those connections between suppliers and our internal stakeholders. And so this is going to be, without a doubt, a collaborative effort among supplier diversity, procurement, our champions, our line of business stakeholders, finance as well. And then we'll go about identifying the suppliers to be a part of this strategy. And in terms of outcomes, we really want to drive awareness internally of our diverse suppliers. So those that we are working with already, when you think about maybe there's an opportunity to expand that relationship. Maybe they have capabilities that we are not leveraging or that other parts of the bank could actually be using. So we want that to be key. Ideally, we're going to increase our diverse spend, but of course we do need to, there's no guarantee that it will lead to additional business, but I think that's the goal because we want to be able to expand the relationship as much as possible. And I think in terms of having a supplier development framework in place, it will help suppliers in terms of building the relationship, driving scale and capacity. And so our goal is to launch this supplier development initiative in Q2, and hopefully, of course, track any outcomes associated with it. And so I know we're going to have questions. I know, Marco, we're going to talk more about this as we go through today. And so I think right now I will go ahead and transition over to Arlene. If anyone has questions specifically for me in terms of what I have shared about our proposed framework, please feel free to chat those. So Arlene, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Camille. As Camille stated, or as Marco stated, my name is Arlene Anderson, and I'm the Senior Manager for Diversity Solutions for Mental Health Systems. Next slide, Allison. And, you know, Metro Health has a long history in the city. They opened in 1837 as City Hospital, becoming the city of Cleveland's first public hospital. Today, Metro Health operates 4 hospitals, 4 emergency departments, and have more than 20 health centers and 40 additional sites throughout Bragg County. The system serves more than 300,000 patients, and 2/3 of those patients are uninsured or covered by Medicare or Medicaid. As we all know, 2020 was a challenging year. We were experiencing really two pandemics. One was COVID-19, in which Metro has been on the forefront with testing individuals in the inner city, caring for patients with COVID, and now giving the vaccine. I actually just got my second dose yesterday, and I encourage everyone on this call to get the vaccine. The other pandemic really was surrounding the George Floyd incident, in which the leadership of Metro Health decided we could do more to control what happens within our hospital. And so, under the leadership of our Senior Vice President and Chief Diversity Officer, Alan Neville, we really put the spotlight on inclusion, diversity, and equity. And we really we could have a whole nother seminar on that topic alone. But Metro Health has always cared for the underserved community, and now we're focusing on the underrepresented population in our community as well. So as we grow, our commitment to being good stewards in our community does too. I highlighted this quote from Dr. Boutros, and this really explains why I wanted to be a part of the Metro Health family. And the quote goes, "We will continue to stand for healing, respect, equity, compassion, accountability, and constructive action. I am asking you to help us know what we should focus on and how best to do it. This is an historic time, and history will judge us by our actions or our silence. We have the opportunity to do better, act better, and be better. It is time for us to come together and to heal one another." This quote was so moving for me, and it covers every aspect of what we do at Metro Health, including our procurement and supply chain. Next slide, please. So I just wanted to quickly highlight some of the construction projects that Metro Health has undertaken. We realize that we're an anchor institution in this community, and we can have a great deal of the impact on the community as well. So we have a 72 affordable housing project that's going to sit on the northern edge of the main campus in partnership with NRP. We have a $3.8 million 15-chair family dentistry clinic that's under construction in Ohio City. There's also a project, $2.8 million facility to improve our outpatient surgery center that's right down the street at West 150th. So we just recently acquired a new Metro Health Police headquarters on West 25th. And we're also working on a $42 million behavioral health hospital in Cleveland Heights. Now, most people are probably really familiar with this last project. It's $946 million, our new hospital. It is the Joanne and Bob Glitt Center. Next slide, please. And so I just wanted to briefly just go over the economic impact and how we can ensure that we are socially responsible within our community. And just with this campus transformation project, the total employment impact, and this is based on a study from Cleveland State University over a 9-year period. So the total employment impact is 5,618 jobs. The total labor income is $360.4 million. The total value added impact is $486.4 million. And then the total output impact is $873 million. Our tax impact is $95 million. So as you can see, we have a lot of control in what we can do to help with our community and ensure that people have equal access. Next slide, please. So when Metro Health was looking for a construction manager, one of the things that is important to note that you definitely want to partner with people who have the same understanding as you do and the expectation of diversity. And so the construction manager set goals in several different areas. Business enterprise goals, so they're tracking their small business enterprise, their minority business enterprise. And on this particular project, they made a special target to track Hispanic business enterprise, as well as women business-owned enterprises. Now, just along with just the business enterprise goals, which is extremely important, the workforce goals are important as well. And so they're tracking the City of Cleveland workforce, our county workforce, the minority participation workforce, as well as Hispanic, and then our female workforce. Next slide, please. I just wanted to highlight this mentor protege agreement, because when we talk about development, this is really key. And so on this particular project, our construction managers really formed a couple of, or made sure their primes formed a couple of relationships. And so Great Lakes Construction formed a partnership with MJP Trucking for mass excavation. And then Zenith and US Communications also formed a mentor protege agreement, as well as Turner themselves formed a mentor protege agreement with Adrian Maldonado and Associates. And as a part of this process for the mentor protege agreements, they set goals and they track those goals to ensure that the protege are achieving those goals. And this is really where, for me, the rubber hits the road, because oftentimes in these types of agreements, the mentee has a great opportunity to learn so much about the back office operations of a project or handling their business. They do quarterly updates just to provide the progress of how the relationship is going. And then at the end of that relationship, they do exit surveys to provide feedback on what they can do better, what they can do different for both the primes and the mentors. Next slide, please. And so I just wanted to kind of peel the onion back and just really cut to the chase and talk about a few recommendations as it relates to trying to develop a supplier diversity initiative. And so some of those recommendations, one is just really to create an internal diversity spend committee. So it's extremely important that you have people within your organization that understands the importance of doing the diversity procurement, and really the people who can make a lot of the decisions to make sure that that we press forward to make sure that we have participation. And I can tell you, in our committee, within the system, we have the vice president of supply chain, the senior vice president of facilities management. We have the director of planning and design and construction. And we also have someone from our legal department, because we are a public hospital. And while we can be very creative, we need to make sure that we stay within the law. And so really that comprises our diversity spend committee. One of the other things is just really developing the contract language, right, to enhance the contractors' accountability and to make sure that they understand they're expected to track their participation on our projects. And so it's very important on how you start out. So we ask that our contractors create some type of diversity plan. If you don't have a plan identified as to how you will achieve the minority participation, then we will have many challenges in making sure that that happens. So early on, the way you start out is the way you end up, and so we ask that people do that in the bidding process, as well as, because things can change from the bidding process to actually getting the contract. So we ask for these diversity plans throughout the entire process. We also built out our supplier diversity portal. It's extremely important for our end users to be able to go somewhere, a place, use a vehicle where they can identify minority, women-owned, small business vendors and contractors. And so we have that diversity portal. Many of the larger companies I know engage in a GPO, which is a group purchasing organization, and you really can utilize them to assist you with making sure that you include supplier diversity. It's just, I can't emphasize enough how powerful it is when you're engaged in a GPO, your buying power just, is expanded. And so naturally, if you want to do business, you will make sure that you will have some supplier diversity in your proposal. The other thing is just really building a foundation for those contractors or partners that we work with. So we've created a minority mentoring program, and really it's just providing guidelines of the expectations that the hospital has as it relates to someone who has agreed to do some type of mentoring protege agreement. And ultimately, we would love to be able to see and encourage joint venture agreements. It's very difficult to get there, but if we can get a majority company and a smaller company go into a JV, the opportunities are endless. The other piece is, which is extremely important, is just enhancing those partnerships, right, with professional organizations and to do your community outreach. So with Metro Health, we partner with NAMAC. We've partnered with Keybank. We partner with the Minority Development Council. So it's important to be able to partner with those organizations, engage with them, and keep that line of communication open. I mean, you really serve, in my opinion, also just not even minority professional organizations as it relates to contractors or small firms, but also those majority professional organizations, because you really can serve as a bridge to connect the companies that way. So if you enhance those partnerships on both sides of the fence, it could really help with your supplier diversity. One of the extremely important things for me is really to implement some type of tool where you can identify, the spend analysis, right? The ability to review the diverse spend from management to a cost center detail, because that's really where the rubber hits the road, and you're able to identify areas that are doing really well and areas that need improvement. And so I just wanted to just highlight a few recommendations as a company will want to build out their supplier development initiative. And with that, I'll turn it back over, I believe, to Marco.
Thank you, Arlene, and thank you, Camille. Arlene, those were some great recommendations, and we're probably going to be touching up on quite a few of them now during our conversation. So again, thanks for that. Again, want to remind our audience to share any questions or add any questions to the chat in the case that they would like to ask something. But to kick it off, at least this part of the discussion, let's just have a casual conversation, ladies, and bring up some of these points that are important and crucial to the development of suppliers, right, within your supply chain. So let's start with the first crucial question. Who are the internal stakeholders that need to have the buy-in or be involved with the supplier development? Camille, if you want, you can start off.
Sure, thank you, Marco. I think it's critical to have executive support for the initiative. So the leaders across the lines of business, corporate procurement, supplier diversity, and our group falls under DE&I, and then supplier diversity champions for us. So I think with all of the stakeholders involved, it can really drive the outcomes, because the line of business, they are going to have their finger on the pulse of the suppliers that they're working with, and procurement as well. So I think you have to have all of those stakeholders present to really be able to have a successful initiative.
Great. Arlene, what are your thoughts in terms
And,
of who needs to be involved?
yeah, I mean, it's really, that's really key. I mean, Camille hit on it. I mean, just having the leadership that believes in supplier diversity. So, people are used to and accustomed to doing things the same way. And so really what we're asking is for them to do things a little different. And so having the support of the leadership, having advocates, I would say advocates within the organization and champions within the organization that will speak to diversity when you're not in the room is extremely important in the success of an initiative for the company.
Great. So I've obviously had plenty of conversations around this area, and sometimes, not always, there's a disconnect between leadership signing on board or agreeing to making significant changes, and that translating into changes in behaviors, habits, so on, to flush out and truly develop a program. I guess I would ask, what are the challenges that both of you foresee? Not that you both experienced it, but challenges that you foresee that others might experience when trying to create a supplier development program?
Well, there's quite a few challenges that could come up, right? Um, just, as I stated earlier, really, people are not accustomed to including diversity as they make decisions. They don't think about that. They think about the bottom line often, but don't understand that bringing in diversity and inclusion can really drive that bottom line as well. So it really depends on their perspective and how they view, what they're trying to accomplish. Um, I just, I try to create an environment that makes it really easy to eliminate excuses why people can't do supply diversity. And when you lay a good foundation, oftentimes it's difficult to say you can't do it.
Camille, anything
And
you want to add there?
I would agree with Arlene, and I think it's also consistently driving awareness around supplier diversity. As Arlene said, often it can be that stakeholders just aren't thinking about supplier diversity. And so consistently driving awareness and having that collaborative relationship with internal stakeholders to really drive the outcomes. So keeping it front and center.
Right.
Well, great point. So when we talk about the benefits of forming or developing a program like this, when it almost feels, or it sounds like sometimes you have to actually sell it, right? Arlene, you kind of hinted at it's not only just a feel-good idea or concept, it's also, like you said, it can affect the bottom line as well. How do you convey that message? How do you necessarily express the benefits of forming a developmental program? Because it is, let's face it, it's not common. It's not something that's usually done. The usual way is, historically, the supply chain identifies a firm that they feel that is large enough, that has the capacity, and they certain things that fit within the rubric, and then they kind of say, this is the horse I'm backing, and I'm going to stick with it until it gives out. So I guess how do you make a dent, or how do you convey the benefits of incorporating this? That's additional work for that team.
So with our proposed strategy, luckily at Key, we have a lot of support around supplier diversity. From our CEO to our executive leaders, all are very engaged and committed to supplier diversity and DE&I. And so I envision standing up our initiative around supplier development. We are going to have the support because of that overall engagement around supplier diversity. And that groundwork, and I think Arlene had mentioned about laying the groundwork, has been in place over decades. And so I think that the next step of implementing the Supplier Development Initiative, I think it will go very smoothly in terms of launching it next quarter, but it's always a journey with supplier diversity, with DE&I. It's a journey to just continue to engage stakeholders to really get to where you want to be as an organization.
Arlene, anything you want to add?
Yeah, and I would just add that, oftentimes in procurement and the supply chain, those contracts can last for, 3 years, 5 years, and firms get extremely comfortable. They service their client very well, and, they make a pretty good profit. But when you are able to engage diversity within that bidding process, oftentimes you'll find that either there's a better way or a different way to provide the service, or actually that's you can get that service for a lower price. And so I would just employ, it doesn't take a lot of effort to extend out to some of the diverse suppliers to see what comes back, because they're hungry for the work. They want to make sure that they provide a good service or a product for you, and so sometimes it may be better to include a diverse vendor or supplier.
So, and Arlene, I think you're saying making sure that you provide the opportunity. I mean,
Right.
keeping it top of mind in front
Right.
of Senate.
Right.
Great. Arlene, you did get a question in the chat here in regards to if you could dive in a little bit more into the joint venture agreements, or what they look like. How would you recommend that companies take leadership to encourage these among their suppliers if they're interested?
Well, as I stated in talking about the joint ventures, it is not an easy thing to do. Oftentimes, a majority company may not be eager to create a JV just because they understand the competition of that minority company, right? And so just the willingness of those two companies to want to create possibly a third company, not maybe even just an agreement, but a third company in which they can go after more opportunities. I think you will find as more people demand or expect diversity in all of their span and all of their opportunities, there may be room and space for people to decide that might be a much better way to go, where they can create this separate entity to address some of those other challenges without losing their own autonomy of their company.
Well, what stakeholders, particularly within the organization, have to be involved in identifying the two firms, in bringing them to the table, into assisting them in any additional way to get them there?
Sure. So I'll just take the GPOs for instance, to really use them. If in fact we identify a big ticket agreement or opportunity, and we want to make sure that we have participation on that, you really can have some conversations around encouraging. We can't make anyone do a JV naturally, but I think if they see that it's a wise business decision for them to create that joint venture, they will take a second look at that. And so really it's just having conversations with both the majority companies and the minority companies and highlighting the benefits of doing the JV and how that would benefit our organization as well.
Great. Thank you for answering that. Next question I have for both of you ladies. In terms of existing and prospective suppliers, Camille, you mentioned within your slides, the 4 to 6 sessions to, in part will take place to identify or help cast a wider net to identify potential suppliers. How do you see that? How do you see that working? What are you leveraging to make that happen or identify the firms? Anything there would be useful in terms of identifying what you're using or how you can get there.
Sure. So in terms of identifying prospective diverse firms, I think it would be, of course, working with GCP. We're a member of the Ohio Minority Supplier Development Council and a national member of the NMSDC. And then also we've been leveraging our relationships with our peer banks. And so last year we started having conversations between supplier diversity, but really procurement led that initiative in terms of having some of those conversations to say, can we share and identify diverse suppliers that we're working with, and then also leveraging some of our other relationships like the Financial Services Roundtable for Supplier Diversity and other relationships with economic inclusion organizations. I think will be key in terms of trying to identify suppliers when you think about suppliers in the digital space or other categories. We want to be very specific, but really leverage those relationships that we have in our memberships to really identify suppliers.
Great, thank you. Arlene?
And I mean, really, I agree with what Camille just said, and I'll just take it a step further and say that, the outreach is so very important. And it's not just a matter of, I have an outreach event, so I want you to come to this outreach event, and, hopefully, networking will take place, and from that, business will follow. But I think that if you really want to have a successful supplier development initiative, there are some things that the organization itself can do. So, for instance, when you talk about looking at forecasting and scheduling of upcoming opportunities, and when you identify minority companies that have the capacity or the capability of providing that service or product, having that conversation with them a year before before the bid is up or the bid is due could be, very helpful for them. So they understand the expectations of the organization and how they can work with them. So I would just employ to take a step further and not just, become a part of organizations and participate, but actually engage some of those minority companies within, to get to know them better yourself so that you can make and facilitate connections for them.
I would agree with that, Arlene, because I think often you have to have those conversations and start to build long before there's an opportunity that comes up. And so making those introductions, having those conversations, and really having them on the radar long in advance.
Great points. I can tell you both from many conversations I've had, a lot of the where we end up in many cases is the question of, have we vetted the firms, for instance, when we're trying to make introductions or when we occasionally provide them a listing of potential MBEs to work with. So I mean, to that point about outreach and identifying firms that are working, some organizations that do lean on other organizations like OMSDC or even the GCP Equity Inclusion Team. The following question after being provided a list of potential firms to work with is, have they been vetted? So it's almost to the extent of trying to understand, to what end or what does outreach really look like? Because if it's really holding events where you have potential suppliers come, but then there is no follow through, perhaps because there's this notion of how do we vet them internally? We don't have the time, we don't have the bandwidth. I think it's something we have to solve for in many cases, because then what we do is we create a pipeline of firms that may fit, but that doesn't necessarily translate to they're going to be given a chance or there's going to be a follow-up conversation at times. So I'm just wondering, I mean, within your own organizations, how do you remedy that? How do you mitigate that?
Well, that's a good question, Marco, because it's a challenge, I think, for the organization. It's a challenge for the MBEs. It's a challenge for the majority firms to make those connections. And so you have to be very thoughtful in that and very targeted, like Camille kind of mentioned earlier when she referred to, say, for instance, the area of IT. You have to, you have to really focus in and say, okay, let me identify those contractors or those firms that have the capacity to do this work. And let's begin to have conversations and encourage conversations with larger companies. Again, making sure that you help them identify tools if they need additional help as it relates to, their back office or whatever the case may be, bonding and all those kind of things. We can't provide that, but we can identify areas in which we can refer them. And so I think that, when you're serious about developing this type of initiative, you really need to cover all the bases and making sure you have a resource for them to go to.
Great. Camille, you want to add anything there, or you want us to move to the next question?
No, I think Arlene did a great job in covering that. I mean, in terms of really just having conversations and digging deep with suppliers. Mm-hmm.
Well, we do have another question from the audience. This one is a two-part question. They say, good morning. Two questions. Does Keybank and Metro Health share or publish their directory of diverse vendors? That's the first question.
We do not. We do not publish our list of suppliers.
Got it. Second question. Are your supplier diversity goals tied to departmental and individual performance goals? The follow-up there is, most often this aids in the support and motivation if willingness is absent to stay committed to the initiative. That's a hot topic.
Yes, it is. And so I would say that goals are not based on each individual department or area. However, the first step really is to identify what is the spend in those areas. And I think in doing that, you will begin the process of saying, okay, this is our larger goal for the entire organization. And so how can we help you do better in your area with your spend? But right now, no, there's no goals tied to, any particular department or area of the hospital.
So I guess the follow-up to that is, do you believe that if individual goals were set on each individual in the supply chain team, in the supply chain division, to meet a certain percentage of spend, that would in turn influence or impact the direction it's going? And so, I mean, would you believe that there would be an immediate kind of whiplash effect where people are like, okay, well, my incentive is tied to this, so I need to really make some changes here and put in some additional work or change my approach on how I'm identifying firms? Do you think that would kind of recalibrate that, or do you think the opposite may happen?
So I will say in Metro Health, oftentimes the people in procurement and supply chain are not the decision makers, right? They facilitate those contracts in the bidding process. So they can't make those decisions. One of the things I will say that have been done in the past is to say, for instance, if, and I can take any department, marketing or something, when they put out something to bid, they could possibly, we could possibly get to the point where we would require at least one of those three bids would be a minority or women-owned firm. I've seen that happen in the past in a different organization, and that has a great impact. Of course, if you're starting to require at least one bid to come from a diverse vendor, it just opens up that opportunity even more. So that's one way that you can do that. But for us, our supply chain, they're not the decision makers of those bids.
Okay, Camille?
Sure, and for us, Marco, in the fall, we have our forecasting meetings. We start working on our forecasting and our goal setting. It really starts late summer, goes through Q4, and so we have those meetings with the line of business, with finance, supplier diversity, and procurement. And that's when we establish an organizational goal with around diverse spend, but also each of our lines of business have a goal. And so they're very focused on that on a monthly basis. We share our spend report. So our leaders are very aware of the goal, and our supplier diversity champions are engaging with procurement and supplier diversity to really drive those outcomes.
And Marco, if I can, I would be remiss if I didn't highlight the point that, we're a public hospital. And so, we do have guidelines that we have to abide by as as opposed to someone in the private sector. They have a little more control over what they do and how they want to do it. But in the public setting, it can be limiting at times.
Okay, fair enough. All right, we have another question from the audience. Have either panelists ever had to break up with a long-standing supplier or had to encourage a colleague to do so in order to transition to a diverse supplier? And how did you have those conversations with both colleagues and the supplier?
Camille, do you want to?
So there are times, of course, when we do transition from suppliers, but I think within our organization, it's the line of business that is going to have those conversations with the supplier because they own the relationship. So I've personally been involved with the conversations with a non-diverse supplier that is moving to a diverse supplier. But we do make changes internally, but I know that the line of business and procurement are involved in those conversations.
Yeah, and I would really agree with that. Although I must say, as an advocate, quite honestly, when I identify, a minority supplier or firm, I probably will have a conversation with them because the expectation is serious, and when you work very hard to make sure that you're increasing participation, you want to make sure that companies are ready and able and willing to provide the necessary product or service. So it's for me, it's a conversation probably out of love, not really a business conversation, but a conversation just to say, I know you can do a great job and just look forward to it. So
and providing coaching in that process
right.
as they acclimate to the environment. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Great. So we have another question from our audience. You guys are stirring some thoughts. When looking for a supplier, is the priority financial or is it minority focused? So is it always you have to make the business senses argument as well, or I think I'm interpreting it right? Is it business focused as well as the fact that you want to diversify your supply chain, or does the financial focus automatically, if you if you're open to new vendors, automatically just diversify the supply chain?
Well, I would say that, the most important thing is the ability to provide the service or product. I really
absolutely
care less whether you're MBE or a majority company. You really have to come with your A game as it relates to responding to those RFPs or whatever the bidding process may be. I think that as I stated in the example earlier, making sure that we do our due diligence to inform MBEs who want to do business with us, how to best do that without breaking the law, just having them to understand the way in which, Metro Health does business or something of that sort. But decisions should be driven by the company's ability to provide a great product or service at a cost, right? Because the cost is important as well. But I think that all the work that we do, we try to make sure we understand the impact, and that's what I talked about earlier. We understand the community impact, and so yes, that's a point, but the main driver really is the service.
I would completely agree with that. Being able to deliver the product or service is number one. We have the same expectation for all of our suppliers. So if a supplier is diverse, that's great, but the offering and has to be what we expect. And I think that's critical.
I would follow up and I would ask this: would it make more sense then to say that the diversifying the supply chain obviously is an objective, but it's not necessarily something that we're talking about forcing the issue, right? It's maybe changing the behaviors or changing the approach on how we identify suppliers or attract suppliers and do the outreach that will intrinsically influence and diversify the supply chain on its own. It's being a little bit more inclusive, no pun intended.
And I would say being intentional, right, Marco? Being intentional.
Yeah, because I understand when all of a sudden this comes across from the top of an organization that we're gonna strive to change or impact our diversity spend by X percentage, but it's perceived as, well, now we have to kind of step outside the bounds of our traditional behaviors or functions, but maybe it's just being a little bit, intentional in the inclusive approach on how you're informing potential suppliers of these opportunities. That in itself may in turn shift the needle a little bit in the direction you're trying to go. So just a thought there. But let's continue. We don't have another one from the group, from the audience right now, so I'll continue with this question. In terms of our programs to develop suppliers, what is success? I mean, what does that look like? What are we striving for? Camille, what are your thoughts?
Sure. I am striving to see suppliers really continue to build upon relationships. I want to see really increased depth in terms of, with our existing suppliers, are we creating and building opportunities for them to navigate within Key? So it's about access, it's about opportunities. I think that is really part of the success. And then if we're able to increase our spend with diverse suppliers, I think that's another, obviously that's success, where the rubber meets the road. Are we building those opportunities that are turning into concrete opportunities for suppliers? But are we building capacity? Are we helping them to grow and develop so that they can have more beneficial or deeper relationships with Key, but with other corporations as well? So I think it's multifaceted in terms of the relationship, in terms of creating the opportunities, and really driving our spend and increasing it with diverse suppliers would be my hope with our initiative.
Yeah, and I totally agree with Camille. One of the important things to do is to have measurements, right? Metrics. And oftentimes those metrics come in the form of dollars and cents and the number of MBEs or WBs that have worked with your program. But there's a lot that happens that you really can't measure. The insight that you can give to an MBE supplier or just a WBE is invaluable. And it not only helps them with, like Camille said, not only helps them with projects within your organization, but can help them outside so that they can continue to grow. I mean, ultimately, a successful program in my sight is to be able to see more MBEs get work, more WBEs get work. And the amount of work that they're getting. So not always just those small dollar projects or bids, but to be able to develop an entire project themselves, ultimately, in my eyesight, would be a successful supplier development initiative
Mhm.
where they can do the entire project. They have the capacity to do the entire project.
Right. Well, I think we have enough time for one more question. So I'm saving the best for last. Because this is one that I've been asking myself a lot lately, and that is, why is it easier to create, establish, and enforce a minority spend in a construction project, right? When direct construction project, as opposed to, for instance, leveraging in the same way relationships with our tier one vendors or suppliers in our supply chain. In essence, I mean, we, as the client or the customer, you have the position or the power dynamic there to kind of influence behaviors from your tier one vendor the same way you would in a construction project. Yet, however, it's where the highest concentration in minority spend in our region is construction. And yet we can't kind of translate that into other aspects of within the supply chain. So I'm just wondering, why is it so different? Why don't more partners in our region explore shifting and using their influence in that way? Your thoughts, Camille?
And so, Marco, are you talking about from a tier one perspective? I just want to
Yeah.
make sure that, okay. So just a couple thoughts. We try to be very intentional with our tier one non-diverse suppliers in terms of sharing our expectations for them to report tier two to us on a quarterly basis, because we have relationships with them. We have a lot of spend with them. So we want them to share that commitment and report not only tier two to us, but we want them to engage with diverse suppliers. I mean, we have that expectation and we share that with our suppliers. In terms of identifying diverse suppliers and professional services, we're trying to be very intentional about that this year in terms of being proactive in terms of identifying suppliers in hard to find niches so that we can bring them into our organization for potential opportunities. So hope I captured kind of both sides of that, of the question that you had.
You did. I would just follow up with this one. How do you obviously have this set expectation that your tier one will report what their tier two spend is, but is it actually something that's within your construct of your contract, where you're saying we have this expectation that you're going to spend this much in diversity spend, you report it back?
It is in our agreement. And then I found also, I mean, this year as in the past, but there's a lot of engagement, and Arlene hit on it earlier in terms of from the social justice, racial equity, there's a lot of focus on DE&I and supplier diversity being a part of that. So our executive leaders and individuals across the organization are very focused on this. And so we will continue to have a lot of conversations with our tier one non-diverse suppliers to move them towards, if they're not there, tier two, and engaging with diverse owned businesses.
Great, thank you, Camille. Arlene, your thoughts?
Well, I think that it's intent. I think that it's education and awareness. I believe that it's been perceived that it's easier. Construction is kind of considered low-hanging fruit. And so it's easier to engage minority businesses or women-owned businesses in construction, or the appearance or perception may be that way. And there just hasn't been a great deal of focus in supply chain and procurement where we really can make a greater impact as it relates to dollars and cents for MBE or WBE in that role. So I think it's really just in being intentional, educating supply chain and those decision makers, and creating the vehicle to get the MBE or WBE in front of those decision makers.
Mhm.
You know, in construction, it's a very small community, and people work together on many projects, and so I think it's easier to do it in construction. But in supply chain, especially if you're talking about medical sales, or I mean, just you know, just selling toilet paper or whatever the case may be, that community may not be as small, right, or as connected, if you will, as it is in construction. And so I think that we have to be intentional. We have to work hard to communicate our decision makers, and we just really need to make people more aware of that. It's business. I'm not going to create a supply business if I can't get opportunity in supply business. If I'm an entrepreneur, I am going to go where I have the highest probability of getting work and getting opportunities. And so
Right.
that's
Which kind of also indicates that the trend of where we have the highest concentration and representation of minority firms is in these spaces. But we can only hope to open the doors so that we can kind of develop and grow in other spaces. So I want to thank both of you, Camille and Arlene, for sharing so much great information and insight with us today. Thanks to all of you who participated in today's webinar. We hope you found this webinar engaging and informative. I know I did. If you have thoughts to share, please let us know. And please make sure to fill out the survey you received via email today. For information about upcoming webinars, please visit gcpartnership.com/events. And this concludes today's session. Thanks again, everyone. Thanks, Camille. Thanks, Arlene. Hope to see you.
Thank you so much.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye.